So I think I was taken aback by that question about what we can practice in Boston, because my first question is just like, which Boston? You know, which who in Boston? Just because we live in this segregated city with segregated schools, transportation T lines, right? Who are we talking about? Like, I don't want to be talking about. Are we talking about the absentee billionaires and millionaires that are buying all of the condos downtown, right? Are we talking about people who don't have access to the jobs that are building the seaport, in Dorchester and Roxbury?
I use he, him pronouns, and I'm really excited to just get into the conversation. Theme is narratives of resistance, and I think a good place to start with when we're talking about narratives is personal narratives. So I'd love if each of us could, given that narratives are complicated, nonlinear, messy, etc., maybe pick 2 or 3 points in your narrative, like in your personal narrative, that you want to have be in this conversation. Does that make sense? Farai, do you want to start? And say your name.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Farai Williams. I'm coming to you today with words from my own organization, which is Dynamizing Equity. Narratives, personal narratives, things that I include 3 moments in my life. So I would say one that jumps out at me immediately is when I was 12. And I'm going to take off my glasses for a second and draw paper at the same time, you see? I'm really good at this. Thank you so much. I grew up in Castle Square in the south end of Boston. I don't know if anyone is familiar. And at that time, when I grew up, it was probably the most integrated community in Boston. Back in the but I do recall one time going downtown, my brother and I used to run across the bridge from the south end into Chinatown. We used to go to the Pagoda, the theater, and we used to watch karate films. And we'd watch 3 or 4. We'd go to Star Movie Theater, the Pagoda, and watch at least 2 or 3 karate films. But one day, while we were walking downtown, there was an African-American male, and he was posted, if you will, so he was up against a wall. There were several police, and clearly there had been some incident. Something had occurred. But I, at the age of 12, wondered why there were several police, one unarmed person, and he had his hands on the wall. And I went to the police officer and I said, "Excuse me, can you tell me what he did?" And excuse me, you need to back away from me. You did. I'm sorry. Can you tell me what happened? Why there's so many people here? Yeah, you need to back up. Can I have your badge number? Get this kid away at the age of 12. So at the age of 12, I was very curious about what was happening between police, people of color, particularly Black, and this idea that there was something unjust happening. As young people, we're always concerned about justice. And so that's one moment that I'll share.
Hi everyone, my name is Lily Huang. I'm one of the co-directors of Massachusetts Jobs of Justice, and I use she, her pronouns. A couple of moments that I'll share is that I grew up in Boston's Chinatown, so right across the bridge, and in Quincy, Massachusetts, to working class immigrant family from China. And I think growing up, because we didn't learn the histories of our peoples in school, and I, didn't have the language capacity to really maybe understand my family story at that time. I wasn't able to understand what my family was going through and what other families in my neighborhood were going through. the struggle and the lives that people were leading back and forth in the borderlands or migrating to the US. And I think another moment that I remember really clearly piecing so much together is when my father lost his job at a Chinese restaurant and was afraid to lose his housing, his car, and had a really big mental health crisis. And for someone who was 21, 22, it was still so overwhelming to be there for my father and to help him get the support that he needed. And I just couldn't imagine what other people were going through at that time. And so around the same time or a year later, my father got the help that he needed. And I started organizing with undocumented youth in Boston. We were fighting for the DREAM Act, fighting against anti-immigrant amendments in our very own state house. And, they shared something with me that it's like, we feel the pain of our deepest, darkest secrets, right? And to see my father struggle and not share his story and not seek help for so long, but then at the same time to see immigrant youth, undocumented, coming from working class backgrounds too, and sharing their story and organizing and winning, that's when I got into the movement, because I saw that, when we bear witness, when we share our stories, when we stand in solidarity with one another, we can win. So those are the kind of moments that, piece together my story about, the work and, why I do the things I do.
My name is Vanessa Silva. I was born and raised in Dorchester, Massachusetts. My parents are working class background. They immigrated here from Cabo Verde, which is on the west coast of Africa. I guess for me, like the first time I really started to understand or start to get an idea of like identity and what that meant in the world was when I was 9 years old. I transitioned from public school and I got a scholarship to a private school in Brookline. And it was a very different environment because most of the kids, it was mostly all white. I was the only black kid in my class, and everyone was extremely wealthy. And I think that was kind of the first shock for me, like the first time that I was like, oh, I'm black in America, which was, as a child, being in an environment that, your identity for me at that time didn't very much matter. And then kind of coming into an environment where you felt more isolated was quite striking. So I think that's the first time that I think my identity, I started to awaken into there was difference in the world. And I would say that continued on. I went to a private school also for undergrad. And I was always really conflicted about my experiences, what I was experiencing at school within the classrooms and the discussions that were happening generally with folks that came from more privileged backgrounds, and how sometimes those conversations were very limiting. And after almost failing undergrad, I had the opportunity to take classes at UMass Boston. And I think being in an environment where it was mostly working class folks, that's when I started to get this sense of solidarity and that I wasn't alone and that my experiences there were many people that were experiencing similar things as myself. And I think that's where my consciousness started growing and I really started to develop. And I was also introduced to faculty in the Africana department that would give me different things to read. I read Asada, the autobiography of Asada, started reading W.E. Du Bois, right, looking at double consciousness, the ways in which we learn in society to see ourselves through someone else's lens. And that really became, I think, like that process of really when I started to develop and make these connections. And I think that, there's still
for each of you before we talk about how our narratives interact. What is it that you are working towards? And this is really meant to be a conversation for now, so we don't have to just be talking out there.
I think for myself, as I kind of touched upon, liberation is a process. So sometimes I think we may think of liberation like, oh, like we had a revolution, right? But it doesn't just end there. We have to continue that process. And I think that solidarity is how we can uplift each other in our full humanity, and what that looks like. And I think that, that's like, for me, that's really like the most important thing, is that we as a community are uplifted in our full humanity. So that's what liberation means to me.
So, thank you both for your words. Certainly the end goal being liberation, but for me, what always resonates is Che Guevara's words, that solidarity is about taking the risk, the same risk, right? We all risking something towards something. You have to have some level of skin in the game. So when you think about, if someone says to me, it's become a buzzword. Yeah, we're in solidarity. Yes, we're in solidarity. And I'm like, I'm not sure that we have the same definition of solidarity, but I am open to it. I want to know. I want to see how we can build. Because for me, depending on where you enter the conversation, where you enter the work, where you enter whatever the action is, you have to be as invested as I am. You're not going to it may not look the same on you, but what is the risk that we are taking together towards liberation? That's what comes to mind.
That's a very, very good question. So we say, solidarity is our superpower. It's the one thing we have to show that we've got each other's back, whether that's being in solidarity so we can take on bad bosses, greedy corporations, immigration and customs enforcement, police, incarceration, all the things. It's our superpower. It's the one thing we have. They might have money, but we have people. And when we do participate, when we do practice our solidarity, it's towards the collective liberation and building worker power, as well as, for me, really importantly, building new leaders, young people, folks who are just getting involved. I think, we struggle every day, and we need more people, and we need new ideas, and we need new visions of how the world can be. And I think by building new leaders through participating in solidarity, we're able to build our power and win. So really, I think leadership development and bringing new people into our community is very important.
Spoken like a true organizer.
So I want to say real quick that the thing I want to throw into this is I think about liberation as freedom, and my definition comes from Nina Simone, and she says freedom is no fear. It's like a beautiful video of her being interviewed, and that's what I'm working towards. Places, moments, experiences where none of us have to be afraid. Where I don't have to be afraid, inability to pay my rent, that I could get pulled over and shot, that my mom has stability, like that's what I am
It's really
aiming for. Yeah.
interesting that you talk about this fearlessness, or this idea of not having fear. The work that I do, this embodied equity work, is about being in dialogue with yourself. Because for me, you can't show up for anyone else until you learn to show up for oneself. You have to start to connect with what's going on within yourself. And so I invite participants to start having a dialogue, and I start giving them exercises in practicing disobedience, just within themselves, to see, that's this on a microscopic level, what it might take to get to a place where we're working together, where we're building solidarity. Because solidarity doesn't happen just because two people come together and sit next to each other and say we're going to do something. It is a relational thing as well. So,
So in that vein, and you all started to do this, but what are your, I don't know if it's like memories that stick out, or processes that you were a part of, or formations that you engaged in, where you experienced your narrative and someone else's narrative coming together or interacting in a way that made something happen. I don't think that it's always like the win. Sometimes our narratives interact and stuff falls apart. So you don't have to tell a happy story, but what are some experiences you had of your story and someone else's story coming together to make something happen?
I don't want to hog the microphone, but I will. No. So I was at a training once in the Redwood Forest in San Francisco, doing a Center for Story-Based Strategy training. And while I was there, outside of the fact that I'm standing in this immenseness of creation, I don't know if you guys have ever stood next to a living being, a tree, that's large enough to drive a car through. I felt like I was with the ancient ones. That being said, while I was in this training, I had an opportunity to speak with a native sister from Canada. Her name is Silva. And I had expressed to her that I knew that I had indigenous lineage, but I didn't know how to go about engaging with other indigenous people, being recognized in that way. And something really magical happened, because she had been organizing around how indigenous people are perceived and how they can work with others outside of the tribe. And here I am on the outside saying, I'm an indigenous person, but I've never been recognized. I don't know what that is. And in that moment, we both were just kind of like, I see you. I see you, and I see your need to belong. And belonging is really important to us as human beings. And that woman, who did not know me, invited me to participate in a water ceremony for indigenous, and only indigenous people can do the water ceremony. And so 3 native sisters from Canada, First Peoples of Canada, and myself, who's also Cherokee, came together in that moment around belonging and how important it is and how people can be invited in. And we sat there and we gave homage to the land and to the water and to the work we were going into. And I've never lost touch with this person, and that's always resonated deeply with me. So, excuse the trembling voice, but it brings up emotions. I've never had a Native person say, come, you're my sister. And I've always been nervous, I want to share, with saying this, because I, as a melanin-dominant Black woman, many of us try to be something other than all the time. We're assigning ourselves to, oh, I'm part this and I'm part that. So I actually don't share that information very often, but in that moment, we just had this understanding of what it is to be a part of the human, right, tribe, but to be a part of something very specific and not having been recognized.
Thank you. I can speak for a moment for myself. Some of the work that I do, I guess as an organizer or trauma-informed facilitator, are with incarcerated folks or with sometimes prosecutors or judges. And when we come together in these spaces, I can't speak of specifics, of course, because we have to maintain confidentiality. But when we come in these spaces, there's often power dynamics that come into play, of course. And sometimes, or all of the time, it's about taking risks. And I won't say that I'm not afraid, but I'm learning and I've learned that I have to do it afraid. And that oftentimes when you challenge in these spaces, that there are consequences. But I think it's knowing that and taking the risk and understanding the consequences, or that there can be consequences, and still willing to take that risk to try to transform, right, minds and to uplift humanity. So I think, for me.
Thank you. I just wanted to connect some dots that I was hearing. So when you were talking about our bodies and ourselves, and it reminded me of when we did a staff retreat one day, and our facilitator was like, take a moment, and we talked some things through, and she was just like, let's forgive our bodies, and everyone just felt this whoosh of I don't know, a sense that we were recognizing our bodies for what we put ourselves through every day, right? So just being connected to our bodies, and this sense of belonging, and this also sense of not feeling like you belong in an institution like private college, or somewhere that you are made not to feel like you belong every day, or you're taking someone else's spot, right? That might deserve it more, not, but that's what we feel. And when we feel that, when we don't belong, or when we feel like we are scared living our daily lives, how can we acknowledge and confront that and build community together so that we, truly build these connections that are important to our everyday lives?
And each, thank you, and each time we do that, it's almost like the booster shot that you take, right? It is. I have to take one every day. I have to inoculate myself every day. But these moments where there's true connection, where there's building, where we get to practice. This is why what I do is called a praxis, because we need to be practicing. Even if you think about the ANT4, right, who went and sat at the counters, or those who got on the buses, they practiced first. It wasn't just, oh my God, we're gonna go do this, we get up, we start walking, we're gonna sit in, or we're gonna stand up, or whatever it is that we're gonna do, but there was a practice. So this idea of each time, like this story that I shared, it built my capacity to build solidarity with another person by having practiced it in that moment with that person. So I think it's something that, as you talk, I said, yeah, it is. And each time, it's infectious. Each win is infectious, and it builds on itself. Very much like a campaign.
So, practice.
Practice.
We live in Boston. Everyone here lives in Boston, right? So, we know Boston.
Boston a long time.
Very long time, some of us. And, we're gonna move to take some questions, but before that, in this moment, knowing that this will be recorded, what is one or maybe two things that in Boston, y'all think people should be practicing? pressure.
And thank you for talking about practice and that this long life journey, I guess, towards liberation and transformation. One of the things that Douglas Miranda uplifted in Bouchra Khalili's 22 Hours, he talked about his experiences in Boston, growing up here, being an organizer, being a captain in the Black Panther Party here in Boston. And he called Boston Mississippi, right? And so we have this very liberal environment, and we move on this guise that we're very liberal and we're not racist. However, we have the data, right? And the numbers tell us something different. Boston has one of the largest wealth disparities in the nation, right? The largest number of segregation, right? And so these things are real here. And I think that sometimes, like, there's like a notion that let's just be positive, let's just be positive and smile. And for me, like, one of the things that I've learned on this journey is that I want to be honest, and I hope that we can all be honest just about where we are, like in our communities, and how hostile our communities can be, and the fact that we live in a culture, right? We live in this imperialist culture that becomes more sophisticated every day, and that teaches us every day, and inundates us with these racist ideologies every day, and we all consume that. I consume internalized hatred, and I'm going to be processing that for the rest of my life, and I'm going to be learning for the rest of my life, and that's a journey. So thank you for that. This practice, that's forever. And so I hope, like, one thing that maybe we can take away from this is that, like, we don't need to jump to say, oh, we're not racist, like, we need to be honest about the society that we live in, but we can still be hopeful that we can change, change ourselves first. That starts inside, to address our own biases, right, and these things that are imposed upon us that we see that we don't even sometimes notice, right, that every day we're being inundated with, and how we start to do that inner work, and I think that's what starts to transform. And I think the second thing is sometimes what I hear from even folks that come from different places is Boston can be so cold. And so I guess maybe I'm challenging us to just see each other, right? To look at, sometimes, like, you don't want to talk to the person that doesn't look so friendly, but maybe giving them a smile, maybe saying hello, acknowledging somebody. When you see someone, maybe when they're in line and they look like, you know what I mean, and someone is clearly maybe discriminated against them or overlooked them or invisibilized them, maybe stepping up and, like, empowering their invisibility and just being like, I see you, and encouraging that. I think that's a challenge that I would like to extend to everyone, just to see each other, to visibilize each other, to say hello, and I think those are steps that we can take, but also, of course, like, internalizing, I think, understanding our own biases, and really starting, continuing that inside journey. So yeah.
Thank you. I definitely agree with that. I'd start practice first, self-care. Self-care is first care. Practice self-care in whichever way resonates for you. If practicing yoga, if practicing qigong, if practicing being in prayer, if practicing, calisthenics, whatever it is that is about taking care of self first, because we have to feed ourselves in order for us to be able to share with someone else. So I always start there. And then just to build on what you were saying, this idea of practicing understanding one's own identity and honoring that, because once you start to practice doing that, then you give other people the right to do the same. So practicing self-care, for me, if you ask me right off the top of my head, and practicing understanding self-identity as it relates to what we're talking about, right? Because we need to be extending ourselves. We cannot do that if we don't feel safe. We don't feel safe when we don't know self. And spirit practice. So all of that I would would say is fair practice.
So I think I was taken aback by that question about what we can practice in Boston, because my first question is just like, which Boston? You know, which who in Boston? Just because we live in a segregated city with segregated schools, transportation T lines, right? Who are we talking about? Like, I don't want to be talking about. Are we talking about the absentee billionaires and millionaires that are buying all of the condos downtown, right? Are we talking about the people who don't have access to the jobs that are building the seaport, in Dorchester and Roxbury? The folks who, now can't afford rent in our city and have to move to like Lynn and Brockton and drive an hour or take buses and trains to the city so that they can work here for minimum wage. So I think, when we ask like what we can do in Boston and what are the things we should practice, I think asking everyday people who live here, like, what do we need to survive and thrive and feel safe, and that we belong in the city, and I think that's brings us back to like how we can strive towards justice and be in solidarity with each other, because very soon our Boston looks very different than it did in the 80s, the 90s, 5 years ago. And I want a Boston where, my friends and the people that I work with and see every day can stay in the city and have enough, have enough pay in their job that 15 is the least that we can do. We work fight for 15, but we need a lot more to be in Boston.
I'm so glad that you said that, because it resonates with me. I just this idea of practicing, and we're practicing too. Practicing having difficult conversations. Practice having those difficult conversations. The more courageous you can become in having practice a difficult conversation. Sometimes we have to have difficult conversations with parents. Sometimes we're having them with children. Sometimes we're having them with partners. We're having them with, right? But practice that so that when you come into a place where you have to have conversations of greater distance, you've been practicing that already. We know that we need to. If we're talking about building solidarity, we have to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate the pushback. So we have a couple minutes, 10 minutes, maybe time for 2 questions. 20 minutes. I'm gonna say 10 so that we don't go over.
So I think it's important to practice resistance. But what are we resisting? And if we talk about liberation and we talk about freedom, we have to be clear on what that actually is. And that, according to Amilcar Cabral, we said that it's about resisting, foreign domination. And so, when we look at people of color, we find that their lives are dominated in all ways. And so how does one liberate themselves and free themselves, and not as an individual, as a community, and how other marginalized groups merge in solidarity? For example, the politics in Boston is horrible. The school system, the housing crisis that we have in terms of gentrification, and $15 an hour is not enough to live in Boston.
You better say.
And so even when the unions raise that, okay, that's good, but the unions need to listen to the workers, and workers will tell you, I need more than $15 an hour. But they feel they're going to ask what they can get, they're supposed to ask what they deserve, in terms of doing that. So I think we got to make clear around, and this is a question, how we understand reform and we understand liberation. Because when we talk of liberation, we're talking about changing the structure of our conditions, and so that the people are more empowered, but not no fake mayor, fake governor, fake city council, who's getting paid by these people who have a lot of money, right? And it's kind of ironic that we're in the museum that has a lot of money, right? Having this conversation, but it's an important conversation. So we first have to define, what liberation is very clearly, and what that struggle involved, and I just laid out. So for black people in this country, is that even the civil rights movement was about trying to assimilate, but people took it a little further and said, no, we need liberation, we need self-determination, and that means succeeding if we have to. Now, people might think that, well, succeed, right? I'm not saying that we should succeed, but that's a discussion that people have to have. But if you talk about liberation, you're talking about having control of your life, your destiny, making decisions for yourself, because if we don't make decisions for us, somebody else makes decisions for us. And for black people, I don't care if you have a black president, somebody else is still making a decision for him as well. So in terms of reform and liberation, I want to hear how you see the differences.
So that's definitely for y'all. Easy question. And also, I heard in there, what is the resistance against? And you all spoke about it in some ways, but I would love if you could just spell it out as you talk about resistance, reform, what can be reformed, and what do we need to just let go of?
Well, it's interesting that you say resist. I think it's beyond resist. I start with, in my work, I have people practice disobedience, which is just practicing to disobey something that you've heard. Resistance is maybe a step up from that, right? So resistance is kind of like, no, I defer from doing that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do you one solid. I have it right here. Disobedience, failure or refusal to obey rules or someone in authority. Now, how is disobedience different from resistance? Resistance, the refusal to accept or comply with something, the attempt to prevent something by action or argument, the attempt. That's the resist. Revolutionary, involving or causing a complete or dramatic change. That's what I'm talking about. I really don't know, and I don't want to start speaking in slang and not deal with reform business, but deal with mush this thing down. It has to change. We don't need to resist what's already going on. There have been plenty of people standing up and resisting. We have many organized groups in history that have shown you how to do it best and do it well. The Black Panthers and people of that. Tons of people resisting, but revolution takes another level. So I think the question was, what do you think that we need to do to reform? To me, it's about revolution. To me, it's about everyone having a seat at the table. It's inviting other people to the table. It's not the same 12 people, the same 12 men, the same 12 white men making decisions about other people. So first of all, we got to get people in the room, get a seat at the table so that we can start talking about. People need to start listening to the folks in the middle, not at the front. I've done some leadership in my time on the planet. I always try to lead from the middle, not be out in front, because I can't hear from the workers, from the people on the ground that are really being affected by it, unless I'm moving from the middle. So to me, we have to start by first forming those spaces, those safe spaces, those caucuses, having those conversations, because 12 white men don't know what's in my head and what I need. I can't even say that 12 white women know what I need and what's in my head. I can't say younger or older, but I can say give someone such as myself a seat at the table and then we can all talk together. Right?
I'd like to add, I'm grateful for your question. I'm grateful that you named Amika Cabral. Because one of the concepts of Amika Cabral that he uplifted in the world is this idea that culture is a weapon, right? And if what we're living under is this cultural imperialism, right? And this ways in which we see things individualistically, we see things competitively, right? Like in this neoliberal era that we live in. It's how do we start to create those structural changes? So when you speak about, is it reform or is it revolution? When I think of reform, it's how you're changing kind of making changes within the structure that exists now versus revolution, which is how you're reconstructing the structures that exist, right? And how you're creating new structures. And I guess that brings the next question is, what are our principles or what are our values, right, that we want to uplift in the world? Do we believe in free education? Do we believe in universal health care, right? Do we believe in housing is a human right? What are our values and our principles? And how does that relate to the structure in which we exist in now, right? Because the structure that we exist in now is the structure that's at the hospitals that we work in, right? Are in the museums that we work in, are in the education systems that we work in, and we all internalize it, white, black, yellow, poor, rich, right? And we recreate those structures within the world. So I think like your question too on like identity, and it's not only about getting someone in there that looks like you, but it's about what is in that individual's mind. And are you thinking like, is your approach a top-down approach, or is your approach a bottom-up approach? Are you leading with the interests of the working class people, right? Are you leading with the interests of those that are the most vulnerable among us, those that are getting most jacked up within this system that is created to uplift those that have the most power and the most needs? Like, those are the questions. So, you know, I appreciate your question. I think that, you know, I agree with Amika that culture is a weapon, and we have to decide what that is as a community, with those that are working class, poor, black, right, people of color leading that front, because we are the most marginalized. And we have those depth of experiences that, although those that may have more privilege and power can read about, haven't experienced in the world, right? And so I think to uplift those voices and like what, Lily was saying, building that leadership within the community, within the ground up, to create changes within the structure that will change the quality of life of the individuals that in our communities that are most impacted.
So thank you. Also wanted to add that I think in the process of revolution, of being in the struggle, is listening to the things that we know deep down inside that have been, you know, erased or been oppressed, and listening to kind of what you alluded to, the people across the world, right, that are fighting every day, whether it be indigenous people fighting against mining companies or any other example like that.
Water.
Here in the U.S. And, you know, I was reading this, the book of Embraces last week by Eduardo Galeano, and he said, you know, for the peoples of America, socialism, being in community, sharing, that was what was natural. Capitalism, white supremacy, that is unnatural. That is imported from, you know, Europe to the Americas. And so how do we get back to hearing the voices and following the leadership of Black, Latinx, you know, working class people here in the States that we've, you know, for generations been pushed and not hear them, right?
I also think it's a combination of things. I don't think it's going to be any one thing. There's no magic, I hate to use this language, bullet. There's no magic one pill that you're going to take that is going to eradicate these things. First of all, we have to be ready and willing to roll up some sleeves and do some work, and do the tough work within ourselves, the tough work with each other, and then the tough work on these systems, these structures, these infrastructures that hold this thing in place. So I think it's a combination of all of these things, right? It's a practicing a little bit of disobedience over here, some resistance there, to get to the revolution, to get to liberation, to get to lifting up humans and humanity, getting us back to our humanity. It's not, right? It's not like we're erecting something new. It is finding within ourselves that which is eternal while we're in the flesh anyway.
And to add on to that, I think the word that kind of when you spoke that came to my mind is sacrifice. What are we willing to sacrifice to build a better world?
Risk. Take the risk. What you got?
Great. So I think Lawrence was right. We're going to have time for one more question. But hopefully our panel may be generous enough to stick around. So if you have questions after that, you can talk to them. And while I have your attention, I would ask you to please fill out a survey before you leave.
I wanted to throw in, to the question, I like the idea of reform is the work it takes to get the system ready for revolution.
Connect the dots.
Thank you. So I'm actually an exchange student from China. So I got here last year, and I went to Bridgewater State University, which is very near Boston. But during the past 2 semesters, actually, I got very involved around the campus, and I felt this sense of belonging that I never felt before too. And that was something that I really want to touch on, because our topic is how do we practice solidarity. And to me, that I really found out that solidarity is also not only about the community within who have gone through the stuff like we have gone through as people of color, but also solidarity is also about all people. It's so to me, I have during the past 2 semesters, I've actually joined a fraternity, and I also had this radio show on campus with another friend, and it's called Cultural Twins, and she's a white girl, and I'm Asian boy, but the more we had those conversations, the more we understood that. The more we found out that it's actually not that different. Different cultures and different desires, different people, we're not that different. And that's what I wanted to touch on, and I wanted to ask about was, the solidarity we're talking about. Ideally, it should be among all the people, and when you just mentioned that 12, white male wouldn't know what you're thinking about, I suppose might you want to just, it's maybe 12 white female wouldn't know, maybe 12 black female wouldn't know. It's all about the individuals. People are different, but also in another sense, people are so similar to each other, and we can still get together. And I never, so I got here 1 year ago, and I didn't really feel that excluded, and that I'm really grateful for. And I just want to know, continuing this conversation, which is going to be a big conversation, what we should do, on campus, in universities, to actually involve more people into the conversation, not only the people, who have gone through stuff, but also about, people who are curious and people who are willing to support. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and welcome to Boston for your 2nd year. I deeply appreciate what you said, and I really value what your experience was based on what you're saying. I do think that we need to have other opportunities to build across, right? When I was speaking earlier about white males or white females not knowing what I need, someone spoke earlier possibly about it's socioeconomic. It's not just race, or this idea or this concept of race. It's class, it's several things. So when people don't have a lived experience, it's generally difficult for them to, I would not ask someone to subscribe to somebody else or ascribe to someone based on their experience. Oh, this is what you need to do. So when I made that references, it was that. It was not that I'm not hopeful, I'm not engaged in conversations across race, across gender, across age. I work with a group, NIAS, Network of Immigrants of Color and African Americans Building Solidarity. Because, for instance, as an African American, when folks come from other countries, we also are the receiving community. And some of the time, there's a distance, right? Even though we have our lived experience as melanin dominant, Black American, Caribbean American, African people, there's still this sense of, I was here first, and I know how it goes, and you're the one that's gonna come here in X, X, and X. So there is building that has to happen there. I think that there need to be several levels of conversation, but I think that people have to be willing to step into that space. Openness meets openness, heart to heart, right?
I think that's why it's important that the young people lead, because they're more open to having these conversations. And like you said, we might all be good people, but we live in a system that is racist, that is white supremacist, that is classist, and oppressing people from all backgrounds, many backgrounds. And so how do we listen and hear, and in having these conversations also keep our eyes on justice and liberation, right? And that's a process, right? It takes time. But I know at Bridgewater State there were hundreds of students and professors who got together and said, we deserve a debt-free future. We don't want to go hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, in debt to go to a public university, a public college in Massachusetts. We deserve to go to college for free. We deserve affordable access to higher education like UMass Boston, so that adjunct professors aren't paid pennies, so that we have night classes, so we have evening courses for working moms and families, so that students get to learn what they want to learn. And so when conversations like that are happening, on campus and in our city, are we listening? Are we learning? Are we bearing witness to the struggle that a lot of college students are homeless? A lot of college students are hungry. I think 40% of Bristol community college students are hungry in Fall River. Is that the world that we live in? How can we change it? And so when we have these conversations, we have that eye towards how do we free ourselves? How do we feel safe and full and happy in the world that we live in? And going back to what you were saying before about having difficult conversations, I think when we have these difficult conversations, and I'm trying to embrace difficult conversations more, right? When we have those difficult conversations, there's such a bigger capacity for love, because you don't just hate, you don't just criticize, right? You find the connections, you have the difficult conversations, you build, and then there's love and new ideas and new ways of
you have
visioning.
other conversations.
It just opens the door for so much more vulnerability, sharing. That it's important to have these daily conversations, acknowledge, the institutions that are oppressing us, and find space for the better.
And I think the reality is that the structure within which we live breeds inequity and inequality, and that's a fact. And there's data to support that. So based on your gender, based on your sexuality, based on your race, there is a difference between your access to healthcare, right? Your access to jobs, what you're going to get paid for the same type of job, the same labor, right? And there's data to back that up. I want to uplift a conversation that I recently had with a close friend of mine. She is a white woman, and she is upper middle class, has a high position with a lot of power. But she's also an avid reader, a social justice advocate. She's smart as a whip, and has been critically engaging within the community for a long time. We had a conversation, I think I was telling her something, vented to her, and she stopped me and she was like, sometimes I feel like you talk to me like I don't understand, like I don't know these things. And I took a risk at this moment. And I turned to her and I said, I know that you may understand these things on a theoretical base, but these aren't your lived experiences. So sometimes when I tell you these things, it's okay. I wish that you could just sit with the fact that there may be some things that you'll never understand. And that's
I just want to ask you, as beautiful as your experience is, I want you to practice sitting in some discomfort with that same friend. Just because there is a fear that we have of being discomforted. Like this idea of sound sleep for people, that's very important, and they do heinous things to other people so that they can sleep soundly. We all need to practice being in that discomfort. That space that you're talking about, I think that we can get to, and we do get to, right? And we do often, but sometimes we run past the work. As one teacher said to me, there's no magic, baby, it's the work. Do the work, and then you get the real. Thank you.
Well, thank all three of you. Y'all are amazing. Thank y'all for listening. Thanks for coming.